Matra sparshastu kaunteya shita ushna sukha dukkadaha agama apayano anityas tantitikshasu bharata. And Krishna says that Arjuna, you are refraining from performing your duty. Every human being needs to perform activities out of a sense of duty. And what is preventing you from fighting is you are having other intentions inspired by fear and desire and not by duty, because of which all these multiple calculations going on in your head is preventing you from shooting that arrow at Bhishma, shooting that arrow at Drona. And therefore, how do you actually enhance your sense of duty? So he says the most important quality which is required for us to act as per our duty, to perform our duties, is tolerance. To the extent we increase our tolerance, to that extent we will be able to perform our duties with diligence, determination, discrimination, and dedication. And therefore, Krishna then explains in the Gita the four kinds of tolerance which we need to exemplify, which we need to experience, which we need to execute in order to actually be able to be worthy of performing our duty. So these are the four tendencies which Krishna is referring to in the Gita, which I'll share today. First is we have to tolerate our tendency to control. All of us have this tendency to control. Before the technology revolution came, humankind always had this tendency, and therefore we have so many people who controlled countries, controlled nations, controlled decisions of the nations, and took them to war, and millions of people actually lost their lives. They say that based on the tendency of being a control freak, a person loses his ability for having humane considerations. And therefore, yes, some degree of control is required, but when we start becoming obsessed with the idea that everything should be under my control, then that leads to various kinds of psychological issues. And therefore, as I described in the last session, one of the biggest causes of stress in people's lives is the gap between expectation and reality. We have some kind of control over our expectations, but we have very little control over our reality. And then when things suddenly change, it completely bewilders us. So therefore, Krishna explains in the Gita in one verse, Prakrite kriyamanani kunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. So the tendency to control comes from the conception that I am the doer, I am the controller, right? Kartaham iti manyate. I am the controller, I am the karta. A person considers and thinks. So prakrite kriyamanani, the modes of nature are actually making it happen. The mode of goodness, passion, ignorance. So nature around us, the body comprises of nature, our intelligence, our mind, it's all part of nature. So under the influence of material energy, which is under the control of a divine power, things are moving. Yes, we have the ability to desire, but based on that desire, the ability to respond to that desire is sanctioned by a supreme power, the Ishvara, based on which directions are given to Prakriti. So this triangle between Jiva, Ishvara, and Prakriti needs to be properly understood. And then we realize that yes, I am a controller, but I am a limited controller. Just like in any organization, you have freedom within boundaries. You are at a certain level of responsibility in your company. There are levels below you, there are levels above you. So you operate at the level to which you have been given authority and authorization. If at the level you are in the tech company, you start expecting to have privileges and freedom and various facilities the way the CEO has, then that expectation would be unfounded. That expectation is a recipe for total frustration. And therefore, many times in real world situation, we do not seem to have any idea what seems to be our boundaries. And therefore, Krishna says, Prakrite Kriyamanani, always understand that we are under the influence and control of nature, birth, old age, disease, and death. I was giving a lecture in many years ago in Chandigarh at the house of the Director General of Police, and I was speaking about the famous story of Rockefeller, whose son was studying anthropology, and he went to study a whole group of tribal people, a whole group of people who were actually engaged in killing and devouring human beings, kind of cannibals, actually, not tribals, cannibals. And he went to study them, and he had security guards, but somehow there was a mistake and he got lost, and he was caught by the cannibals and killed. When Rockefeller heard that news, he was totally, morose. He became hopeless, and he commented that till the last day of my life, I can never have a single night in peace. So when I spoke this story, I saw that the Director of General of Police was crying profuse tears. And I was a little bewildered whether I spoke the right thing or not. And after the lecture, I asked him, why were you crying? And he said, I had a 25-year-old, 27-year-old son, and he was married. He got a small boy, 6 months old. At that time, my son was driving in a car in the highway and had accident, and now my son is dead. But I have never revealed it to my grandson, and I'm dreading the day when we will reveal to my grandson that your father is no longer there. So therefore, we realize that many circumstances which we go through in life are beyond our control. And so Krishna says to Arjuna, always be aware of this fact that I have control, but I have limited control. I must acknowledge and be grateful for all the freedom I get within this limited control. Number two, I must respect those who have greater control than me, and I must have the highest degree of awe for those powers which have total control. And therefore, this is the first item which Krishna is telling Arjuna. You have to tolerate the urge to be the controller. Ahankara vimurhatma karta hamiti manyate. Therefore, in pujas and yagyas, we say Namaha, 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 Krishnaya Namaha, Vishnave Namaha, which basically means not mine. Ahankriti makkarasyat na karattan nishedaka tasmato namasa kshetri swatantrem pratishidhyate. In the Padma Puran, it is described the word Namaha means, Ma refers to Ahankar and Mamata, and Na means denying that. So therefore, we are actually acknowledging this is not mine. I am not the controller, and this does not belong to me. So therefore, the tendency to control, number one. Second, we have to tolerate the tendency to consume the sense objects. Consumption comes in the form of lust and greed specifically. Arjuna asks question to Krishna in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And he says, Athakena prayuktoyam papam charati purusha anichannapi varshneya baladiva niyojita. My dear Krishna, please tell me, why is it that many times we don't feel like doing something? We are convinced this is sinful, we should not do, but still we are pulled into doing that. So Krishna says, my dear Arjuna, Kamaesha Krodhesha Rajoguna Samudbhava Mahashano Mahapapma Vidhenam Ihavairinam. This force from within which pushes you and propels you into performing actions which you would normally not have done is called lust. Lust is that uncontrolled desire from within which pushes you into action and propels you into performing acts which normally you would not have done, right? And the lack of fulfillment of the lust results in anger. So therefore, Krodha is known as Kamanuja, the younger brother of lust. And when lust is fulfilled, it converts into greed or lobha. Trividham narakasyedam dwaram nashanam atmana kamam krodham tata lobham tasmat etatrayam tejit. Lust, greed, and anger, these are the three gateways to hell. And therefore, we have to be extremely careful of these three gateways, because all of them propel us to perform activities which make us regret, because we have been given enough. And that's what the Ishopanishad says, that Ishavasamidam sarvam yat kinchit jagatyam jagat. Take whatever you can. And the example is given: if there is a bag of rice and grains thrown in the middle of the road, then, you know, pigeon will come and take as many grains as the pigeon wants and eat and then go. Then some other animal will come, a cow will come and eat a few grains, be satisfied and go. But the human being will come and pick up the entire grain and fill it up, take a little bit to eat, and then sell the rest of it. So therefore, greed is a very, very big factor. In the early 90s, there was this famous, stock market scam, not Harshad Mehta, but one more. And this gentleman was friends with one of my close friends who was a devotee. And he was also in the stock market. This devotee was a stock market. And what happened was, this stockbroker came up with a scheme. It was kind of a dubious scheme, but he told my friend, let's do this scheme together, join me. We'll make so much of money, your 7 generations will not have to work. But then this friend pointed out that, but looks like the scheme is not completely clean and above board. He says, yes, it depends on the interpretation of the law, which way you want to interpret. But if you're really into making quick money, there is no better chance than this. So, my friend was quite inspired. He came back to the temple and met one of his monk friends and asked him that, you also come from a banking background before you became a monk. This is what the proposal is. What do you think? And this monk, who was like a spiritual guru, he said, this particular scheme which you're talking about is not fully clean and you should not get into it. He says, but don't worry, I'll invest some money in this and I'll make so much of money, I'll give half of it to the temple. What do you say about that? Then give me your blessings. He says, no, we don't want this kind of money, because when you run behind this kind of a scheme, inevitably at some point of time you'll be trapped and then you'll have to spend the rest of your time in jail. So we are more concerned about you than what you will give to us. So he went back with a heavy heart. He was not convinced, but he decided to follow and told this stockbroker that, I'm sorry, but my monk friends are refusing to give me permission to do this. And I stay in the temple, so I respect them and I want to follow them. So he says, hey man, these guys don't know what they're talking about. They're monks, they're nothing to do with money. They don't know any history or background of money. You're being taken for a ride. Think again. He says, no, I made up my mind. So this guy went ahead and then did his particular scheme. It made huge success in the initial few months. And then in a couple of years, when the actual reality came out, then the various, agencies like SEBI and all got wind of it. And then they made an inquiry, and then finally he was sent to jail. So my friend was called to the jail by this broker's wife. And when my friend went there, this broker's wife said, what's the difference between my husband and you? There is only one difference. Both of you are quite brilliant. Both of you were quite capable. But the only difference between my husband and you is you had that monk friend who actually gave you the guidance and put brakes on your tendency to be greedy. And therefore, you decided to restrain yourself, whereas my husband did not have that friend, because of which he is in the jail. So therefore, Krishna says, Kamam, Krodham, Tata Lobham. These tendencies, they actually push us to consume more than what we can actually digest. So the tendency to control, the tendency to consume, both need to be tolerated. Third is the tendency to compete with each other, to compete and outdo and defeat the other person, right? Parotkarsha Sahishnuta, how to be at the top, how to be number one. So Duryodhan had this major problem. And Duryodhan means one who's always fighting for the wrong cause. And the wrong cause was protecting his ego. So Duryodhan had only one mission in life, to be number one, always. Okay, even the biggest, richest person not able to be number one for more than a few months, as per the Forbes list. So Duryodhan had a huge, megalomaniac ambition that he should be always the number one, and nobody can actually be number one. So that's called Duryodhan, fighting for the wrong cause. And so what Duryodhan would do is, in summer season, he would not allow anyone to hold even an umbrella above him. Because for him, it was an insult, because he felt, how can anyone be above me, including umbrella? So he would allow even the sun to hit his head and tolerate that heat, because he just felt that he is number one. And therefore, the entire battle of Kurukshetra happened not because of lack of resources which Duryodhana had to give to the Pandavas. The Pandavas, after the Vanvas, asked for only 5 villages. And Duryodhana said, I will not give you even space and land which is equivalent to the tip of a needle, which basically means that Duryodhana would not allow the Pandavas to come near him, because he was so insecure, because his ego was based on the fact that my identity is that when I compete with others, I outdo them, defeat them, and establish myself. And therefore, if we are constantly in that mood, then we will always be in anxiety. That was one of the issues with Karna, that Karna was not so focused in becoming an expert in his skill as he was in being able to outdo and defeat Arjuna and demonstrate that he is better than Arjuna. So therefore, this tendency to compete should be considered to be like salt. Take as much salt as required in the food. Too little, not good. Too much, not good. And therefore, you have to be aware of the competition so that you can progress and be relevant and do your business with appropriate level of maturity and effectiveness. But if you're only obsessed with this idea, then you will fail to even recognize good things when you see them around you. So therefore, the tendency to compete is a very major, lacune in our system. And today we find that the education system is practically driven by this. Corporate life is driven by this. People are actively involved in activities just so that they can demonstrate their competitiveness and outdo the others, like that. I had a friend who went to a business conference, and he saw somebody's business card there. It said PhD BF was the education qualification. He said, what does it mean? It means PhD but fail. He says, why did you have such a qualification? He says, well, my father wanted me to be PhD because he saw somebody else was a PhD, who was a cousin of mine. So therefore, I got into this mood, and I realized I couldn't manage to get a PhD, so I dropped out. But then still there was pressure that you have to go and show yourself in these conferences. So to be honest, I just put PhD and added BF to it. But you know what? Most people think this BF is a degree beyond PhD. You're the first person who's asking and finding out the reality. So many times, lack of peace, lack of stability, lack of just feeling at ease with oneself is caused because one is not focused on what one has, but one is totally focused on comparing and competing with others. So this is the third principle, that we are having this tendency to control, convince, or control, consume, and to compete. And the fourth principle is we have a tendency to convince others, and that is known as paramata sahishnuta. tolerating others' opinions, which means that rather than focusing on the truth, we want to focus on whether I have won the argument or not, and whether the other person has surrendered to my point of view or not. So one may have very close friendship with someone, but one need not always agree with all their ideas and opinions. And therefore, when you are around with someone, one of the biggest skills you have to learn is to tolerate different opinions. And I think in today's day and age, it's very important because practically the internet is exploding with a pandemic of anger. Anger seems to be such a prominent emotion in the online world today. And everybody seems to be obsessed with the fact that unless I convince others of my viewpoint, my life has no meaning. And in order to do that, they engage in all kinds of usage of words which crosses the boundaries of civil behavior. And therefore, since all of you are involved in technology and you're also creating the technology which is entering people's lives, you have to realize that unless people agree to follow cultured behavior, then you're just going to be having COVID will go as a pandemic, but the pandemic of anger will go on rising across the world. And so within the Pandavas, we see that the Pandavas had different kind of skill sets, right? So yatra dharma suto raja gada panir bhrukodra krishnostri gandivam chapam surat krishnastato vipat. Yudhishthir Maharaj was dharma personified, Bhima was power personified, Arjuna was skill personified, Nakul and Sahadev were loyalty personified, Krishna was well-wisher personified. Each were powerful. Each was powerful, but each one of them many times in situations had different opinions. For example, during the Draupadi's episode of the gambling match, so what happened was, one day, this is much before when they were staying in Indraprastha, Vyasdev came and visited Yudhishthir Maharaj. And Vyasdev said, Yudhishthir, let me tell you something about your future. Yudhishthir said, what is that? Vyasdev said, you, Yudhishthir, will be the cause of the destruction of the entire family. Yudhishthir got bewildered. I am righteous, I am truthful, I am honorable, I am respectful, I have all the good qualities. Why I will become responsible? Vyasdev said, I see the future, you will be responsible. Yudhishthir did not consult anybody. Immediately he took a vow. From this day onwards, I will never disobey a senior person's command and order and instruction. Everybody said, Arey, why you are taking such a vow? Yudhishthir said, Vyasdev said, I will be responsible for the destruction, but I am convinced if I am always submissive, I am always obedient, I am always loyal to others, the elders' instruction, I cannot go wrong because elders will always be right. So it was a unilateral decision taken by Yudhishthir without consulting anybody, which he would do many times, much to the irritation of others. Well, fast forward, and then we find that Shakuni sends an invitation on behalf of Dhritarashtra and comes as a messenger to invite Yudhishthir and the Pandavas for a gambling match. Everybody can see through that this is a conspiracy to trap Yudhishthir and the Pandavas, and all of them tell Yudhishthir, deny, please do not accept this invitation, do not go to the gambling match. You will be trapped, you lose your kingdom, you lose your reputation. Yudhishthir said, I have taken a vow and I cannot go against my vow. My vow is more important to me than all of your opinions. Keep your opinions to yourself, to hell with it. I am going ahead. Unilaterally, Yudhishthir Maharaj took a decision to go ahead with the gambling match, much to the irritation of so many others. And then all of us know whatever happened in gambling match, as they say, the rest is history. So therefore, Bhima was so angry and upset that as item after item was being lost by Yudhishthir, Bhima stood up and started shouting and screaming in a loud voice on how he will destroy Yudhishthir. Arjuna was also very angry. So yes, the Pandavas were 5. Yes, they had one wife, Draupadi, but life was not easy for them. They had millions of differences and arguments, but to their credit, they always functioned under a higher principle, never allowed their mission and vision to get out of their vision, get out of their decision making ambit. And based on that higher principle, they would make the final decision, because of which they decided to resolve their differences of opinion, cooperate with each other for the higher principle of fulfilling Krishna's will. And therefore, although they had strong opinions, although they were powerful personalities, they did not get obsessed with the desire to convince others, but they would adjust and tolerate as per the time, place, and circumstance. So, therefore, dear friends, these are the four things the Gita explains which we must try to tolerate. Tolerate the urge to control, right? Which is basically, our tendency to control things and control people. Second is Vega Sahishnutta, our tendency to control. We have to tolerate our tendency to consume and to be succumbing to lust, greed, and anger. Third is we have to tolerate our tendency to compete with others, Parotkarsha Sahishnutta, our tendency to post ourselves to be superior to others, better than others. And fourth is we have to tolerate our tendency to convince others, Paramata Sahishnutta, and tolerate the differences of opinion for the higher principle and the higher mission. So this is what Krishna tells Arjuna and concludes by telling Arjuna, once you learn the art of tolerance, then Arjuna, you master the art of performing your duty successfully. When you practice your duty properly, then you lead dharmic principles. And then only based on dharma, you can actually experience real joy and real satisfaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Like in the last session, you covered the change and identity as the major keywords on basis of which we can understand Bhagavad Gita. And today you have covered the 4 principles of tolerance. Thank you very much. Prabhu, I had a question. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so as you are describing about Pandavas, that they sacrificed their life for a higher principle of fulfilling Krishna's will. And we see that like Pandavas, they underwent so many problems, so many difficulties. So in our life also, we are taught that we should try to fulfill and obey Krishna's will. So is that the understanding that we will also go through those problems? Because that question always comes that then we should not maybe follow this process because there will be too many problems. So just wanted to have your opinion on this.
When you go to the hospital and the doctor gives you a medicine or an injection, that medicine and injection is supposed to help you overcome that pain. So just because you had pain before and then after getting the injection, the pain doesn't subside immediately, doesn't mean the injection is causing the pain. So you have to be patient for some time, and that's why people who go to the doctor in the hospital are called patients. You're expected to be patient and allow the time period for that particular drug or particular thing to act. So therefore, spirituality and religion and philosophy is not an insurance against fate, but it's an insurance against loss of faith in the midst of disastrous fate. Therefore, although Arjuna heard the Gita, but just after hearing the Gita, he lost his son Abhimanyu. Just so that we don't think that hospitals don't exist to eradicate disease from the planet. Hospitals exist to help us cope with the disease and cure the disease and curate solutions to the pain we experience. That's the idea. Next.
Thank you.
Anybody?
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask question, this is the time. to take maximum advantage. Yeah. You can raise your hands.
Yeah, Anuragji.
Hello, Prabhuji. So my question is regarding the fourth principle that you talked about, which is the tolerate the tendency to convince others.
Right,
Uh, and then there is also the underlying principle of staying within the higher principle, which involves not destroying the relationship despite having a difference of opinion. Now, very often we come across situations where, say, for example, friendship, right? Uh, there is a difference of opinion. Now, even if we are able to apply this principle of having a different opinion, yet staying under the higher principle of not destroying this relationship, but the other person doesn't follow that.
right.
So then the conflict arises as to how to tolerate that urge to convince the other person to also stay within that boundary, even if there is a difference of opinion. And at times what it happens is it leads to still the destruction of that relationship, and the person who wants to save that relationship still feels cheated, or say that, look, I respected the higher principle, however the other person did not. So how do we deal with that conflict internally?
Yeah, so there are only three ways in which someone gets transformed. Either you tell them and they get transformed, then it's fine. You tell them, and they don't agree. Then you try to get someone who you feel will be neutral and accepted as neutral by both parties. So, therefore, maybe that person is able to convince. But if neither you nor other person is successful in convincing others, then the third factor which can convince is only the time factor. In due course of time, when experience hits hard, then many times we have seen that what a person doesn't agree initially, but with experience they get convinced. Like when Ramchandra was crying and crying and crying in separation from Sita, Hanumanji was looking bewildered, and Hanuman was looking again and again at Ram, thinking, Arey, Ram is supposed to be great soul. Great souls are supposed to be tolerant, and tolerant people don't freak out like this, uncontrollable crying and sobbing. This is something wrong. And so he thought about it. He didn't speak it, but Ramchandra could sense it. So Ramchandra gave his ring to Hanuman and said, when you see Sita, give it to her. So Hanumanji took the ring with him because Ramchandra knew that if I try to convince Hanumanji verbally now, Sita is so beautiful, so gentle, and so dependent on me, and therefore I'm crying and all that. So it will be theoretical. Certain opinions only get changed with experience. So by the time Hanumanji reached Lanka in the Ashok Vatika and met Sita and saw her, the first words which came out of Hanumanji's mouth after seeing Sita is, after having lost such a delicate, beautiful, gentle lady like Sita, Ram is still alive. How is it possible? Which means that Ram doesn't have a heart in his place. He has a stone in the place of his heart. So Hanumanji understood but realized, but he changed his opinion only after going through a certain experience. And Ram, being the Supreme Lord, he only understood one thing, that this is not the right time to say this to Hanuman. Whereas when Bharat came to meet Ram, Lord Ram felt that yes, this is the right time to convince Bharat to go back and lead the kingdom and administer a kingdom of people who hated him. Ayodhya Vasis hated Bharat because Ayodhya Vasis felt Bharat is responsible for Ram's Vanvas. Bharat is the culprit and the main conspirator to inspire Kaikeyi to do this because he's a beneficiary. And therefore, Ayodhya Vasis, when they saw Bharat, they would pelt him with stones. So therefore, Bharat realized that Ram wants me to do, It's a difficult situation to administer people who don't like me. But he continued as the king of Ayodhya for 14 years till Lord Ram returned back. So Ram felt confident that I should tell Bharat right now. And he didn't feel confident in other situations. So therefore, you have to judge and gauge yourself on the spot based on multiple factors like your relationship with the person, their attitude, their past track record, their credibility, and some intuition you should have whether I should be the one, be the carrier of this message of a different opinion, or should I co-opt someone else who's a colleague or a senior to be the carrier of that message, or should I allow time factor to be the carrier of that message and give the feedback? So you have to choose between these. Okay, thanks, Anurag.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yeah, Sukriti says, how does one craft a sense of purpose without wanting to control, compete, convince? Yes, good question. You need philosophy, you need guidance, you need some kind of a practice on a regular basis for you to be able to hear your internal voices better. Right now, people are creating sense of purpose based on external sounds, external opinions, what society is speaking. But for you to be able to understand that, number one, you need meditation. Number two, you need mentorship. Number three, you need to be meeting people who have already been on this path and done it great. Right? And so once you do this, gradually a little bit of experience is required in one direction, and then you'll get an idea whether this is the best way to move forward. Okay, Gopa Thakur Roy, madam, hence typing here, many times in an office culture we see everyone trying to control and compete, everyone thriving on this. How do we control ourselves and pivot to being calm and aloof from such voice? Yes, it's a fact that many times organizational cultures tend to decay in this direction, but that's when the people within the organization need to reflect, look upon that if we get into this kind of a culture, then we really miss out on making excellence a habit. So if you develop the culture of taking pleasure in others' excellence, then you rise beyond the tendency to envy and compete, and you actually get into the mood of complete rather than compete. You realize, I have these skills, this person has those skills. When we come together, we are not competing, we are completing each other, we are collaborating with each other. So therefore, some degree of meditation, mentorship is very, very important for us to develop those lenses, that perspective. Okay, so thank you, Rajat. I think there are no more questions.
Yes, Prabhu, it looks like there is no question.
Great meeting all of you, Google employees and Google staff members. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prabhu, for giving your precious time to us.
Thank you.
Request.
Thank you.